and Charlie Blocko's on Fulton Street and Nostrand Avenue from 3 p.m. For more information, please visit WBAI.org or visit WIADCAcarnival.org.
And once again, this is WBAI New York 99.5 FM and WBAI.org on the web. The previous program was The Jordan Journal, hosted and produced by Howard Jordan, heard Fridays starting at 3 p.m. Thank you, Earthmom, for those announcements from the Community Bulletin Board. Stay tuned for State of the Arts NYC with Savona Bailey-McClain coming up.
Good evening. This is State of the Arts NYC, where we cover art. And tonight, our theme is initiative, imagination, individuality, and independence. It's a continuation of the series that we will be doing for the next several weeks that deals with radical breakthroughs, movements, and personalities. And as I was thinking about this show, a quote came to mind by Claude McKay. If a man is not faithful to his own individuality, he cannot be loyal to anything. And I think that's very powerful considering the people that we have joining us tonight. Tonight, we will have Stacy Hollander, co-curator for the exhibition at the American Folk Art Museum, War and Peace. And what I like about this exhibition is that it was developed by military men who wanted to get in touch with their creativity even in the midst of war. And then we have Assistant Curator Rujeko, I hope I'm saying it correctly, Rujeko Hockley from the Whitney Museum, and she's going to talk on their new exhibition, An Incomplete History of Protest, and it stems from their collection from the 1940s to the present. And given our political climate, I think looking at past resistance and movements could be both enlightening and helpful. State of the Arts is also delighted to have the filmmakers Karen Bernstein and Louis Black talk on their new American Masters documentary on Richard Linklater. And his new documentary will be called Dream is Destiny, a self-taught filmmaker, screenwriter, and actor who is fiercely independent with his filmmaking style. And then we will have a representative for Jazz Refreshed and the British Underground. And they're going to be here this weekend. They're going to be doing gigs all over the city, but especially for Afropunk. In fact, tonight I'm going to a pre-party. And they're going to talk about the UK jazz revolution. So we got a great lineup for tonight. So I want to first thank Stacy for joining us tonight. How are you, Stacy?
I'm just fine. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. And we had a nice chit-chat earlier with some tea. And Stacy, you're the Deputy Director for Curatorial Affairs, and you're the Chief Curator and Director of Exhibitions at the American Folk Art Museum, correct?
That is absolutely right.
So tell us a little bit about how did this particular exhibition, War and Peace, came about?
Well, the museum has 2 quilts in its collection, and one quilt we took in 1986, and at the time nobody recognized what it was, what it meant, where it came from. Mm-hmm. By the time we acquired the second quilt in the early 2000s, I knew what the quilts signified. Ooh. And what I had found out was that these were quilts that were made by probably British soldiers during the Crimean War. Yes. Or during that general period. But as I tried to learn more about these textiles that were made by men mm-hmm. under these, very different circumstances from the quilts that I was used to mm-hmm. Thinking about, I found that there was very little information that was available about them. And in fact, the first serious scholarship didn't begin until around 2009, 2010.
Really?
So this type of quilt has been on my radar for a very, very long time. And I learned that an Australian quilt scholar, collector, and historian was about to publish a book on this topic.
Wow.
And so I was in touch with her immediately, and that's how this exhibition has come to be.
So that's with Annette
Giro, Dr. Annette Giro.
Yes.
And a number of the quilts, I would say the heart of the exhibition comes from her collection. She has been collecting this sort of textile for around 30 years. And as I understand it, there are fewer than around 100 that are known today. So, you know, I've tried to gather examples from museums around the world and from other private collections as well.
Wow. I really wanted you on the show because this is kind of like a breakthrough exhibition because the works are made by men, and you would not normally associate men with quilting. So that's one thing. But the other thing that I felt was interesting excuse me, is that next month is New York Textile Month, and it's launching, I think, for the first time in New York, correct?
I think this is the second year.
Second year, okay. And the point of New York Textile Month is to reconnect people to different types of fabrics and techniques. And I thought, well, wouldn't this be a great conversation to talk about how these men, during stressful moments in their lives, took the time, nonetheless, to get creative. Do you have any information from Ms. Gerald to talk about perhaps, you know, the techniques that were used? And because I saw a lot of small little pieces.
Yeah, the quilts are quite remarkable. And, I mean, that was one of the aspects of them that was so intriguing at first because just aesthetically, they're very, very different from the quilts that are made by women. But they're also very distinctive because of the material that is used in making the quilts. They are made from cut-up military uniforms. So the wool is very dense.
Okay.
It's very heavy.
Okay.
It's very difficult to pierce with a needle.
Right.
And so they're not literally quilted. They don't have all that elaborate stitching going all over the surface. They're pieced. And if you think of even today, a navy pea coat, the way the fabric is a little bit felted on the surface, you know, it has a raised nap. Well, that you know creates a density for warmth for the soldier, but it also hides the stitches. So most of when they're made into quilts, so most of the quilts are made from, I mean, sometimes 25,000 pieces that are no larger than 1 inch square, and the actual technique of putting them together is rather rudimentary. It's a simple overstitch or a whip stitch. Okay. And they're usually stitched from behind, and the stitches kind of get hidden in the nap of the fabric. Okay. So there's no seam allowance. You know, the pieces are just kind of put together. Okay. And so it's a very different technique to assemble these textiles, but it gives great versatility in terms of the kind of mosaic geometric approach to the works that were made during the era of the Victorian British Empire and the conflicts that immediately come to mind, such as the Crimean War. Right. And
because that was in the 1850s.
1850s, yes. There is a section of the exhibition that will look at quilts that are even earlier, going back to the very early 18th century, that were associated with the Prussian Wars and the Napoleonic Wars. Okay. And those are done in a different technique that's also very interesting. If you're familiar with the technique of applique, yes, where you know some kind of element is cut from one fabric and then stitched on top of another, and that's how you can create a pictorial quilt top. The quilts from the Prussian and Napoleonic periods were made in a technique called intarsia.
Yes.
And in this technique, pieces are cut out of the fabric, and it can be as fluid, as organic, as ornamental as you like, because they're just put together like pieces in a puzzle, flat on a single surface. There's no layering. And as a result, they look exactly the same on the front and on the back. Again, using these military wools with the raised naps so that the stitches are not seen.
See, I didn't know about the applique. It's funny. Ooh, dating myself. I would say about 20 to 25 years ago, I was working with an artist where we developed a couple of wall pieces with applique. And so she told me what did I wanted to do. So I wanted to deal with folktale, with High John the Conqueror. And so I created an octoroon and a bird that would mimic to me, the spirit of High John the Conqueror flying, and it was about maybe 5 or 6, and we actually created these, drew them, cut them out, stitched them, and then added that on top of another piece of fabric.
Kind of like a collage.
Yes, and we used beets to dye the main piece, so it has this sort of pinkish color, and then we appliqued the other pieces. It's just funny that you said that. I haven't thought about that. I mean, I have the piece where I see it every day, but, you know, just the whole process of doing that. It's a very involved process.
Yeah, it's a very involved process, and it's the one that we're more familiar with in the United States. You know, when we think of pictorial quilts, they tend to be done in the applique. So intarsia is an old technique. It goes back to the 15th century in Europe, and it's very complex. It's very, very difficult and technically demanding. So those quilts were usually done by professional tailors, and it's a technique that actually made its way into Britain in the mid-19th century, mostly through immigrant tailors who were coming and, you know, reinstating their businesses, joining the tailoring guilds, but who had a high degree of technical skill to create these very, very complex images.
Okay. So now, before we wrap up, we still have several minutes. Tell us when the exhibition is going to start and the address of the museum.
The exhibition will open to the public on September 6th, and the American Folk Art Museum is on Columbus Avenue between 65th and 66th Streets. And it is going to be a dazzling exhibition. The geometric quilts, I think, are... and just the whole idea of men, as you say, in war circumstances, it's just hard to comprehend.
Right.
You know, having the time or
the focus,
the mental focus to create. But I think that was part of the attraction of this kind of work. It was a distraction. It was a way of paying homage to. In some cases, to fallen comrades using their uniforms. So, and it was also a documentation of one's own experience during war. Many of the men stitched the names of their regiments, where they had served, the battles that they engaged in. It's a way of processing, and I think, to me, it's also a way of controlling the experience.
But it was done quietly. See, that's what caught my attention, too. When you knit or quilt, it's quiet. And that's one of the attractions to it, where you can be still and enjoy even this repetitive movement. And sometimes, as we're dealing right now in this country with a lot of chaos, it's, you know, people think that that is the only way you could bring about change is through chaos. But no, sometimes in quiet moments, you could say a whole lot. And that's what I thought was attractive about this. They were surrounded by noise, but at the same time, they wanted to deal with remembrance, and they wanted to deal with honoring, like you said, comrades in a quiet way. And I thought that was just as powerful as, you know, all of the stirrings of war, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, any creative act that requires intense labor and intense concentration on a vision, an aesthetic vision for what you're creating, I think is very introspective. And you're quite correct. And I think is a way for an individual to to create his own little bubble of bubble sanctuary,
Right.
with in the midst of horrendous activities that were taking place.
And then still to connect with other human beings too, because they can't do this alone. They have to do this with other people. So it's about being quiet. It's about doing something individually, but yet connecting. That's what I thought. Connecting to life, connecting to people, comrades.
Yeah, well, it is connecting to life. And, one of the interesting thing about these quilts, especially when you consider them within the context of war, is how optimistic so many of them seem to be. And in a way they're a facade of the experience, but they also have this sense of optimism and looking forward, and documenting what this experience has been, taking the uniforms that were worn through a set of circumstances and then processing them into a different creative form and transforming them, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just wanted to say, because now we do have to wrap up, this was really an enjoyable conversation. I am so glad we were able to make this happen with the American Folk Art Museum, and I look forward to the opening of your exhibition.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here with you.
So we're going to take a break now. Thank you. And we are back with State of the Arts NYC, where we cover art. And we just had a lovely, lovely conversation with Stacy C. Hollander with the American Folk Art Museum on their upcoming exhibition, War and Peace, Quilts from Military Fabrics. And now I have the pleasure of bringing Rujeko Hockley, who is the Assistant Curator at the Whitney Museum, on their new exhibition on an incomplete history of protest from 1940 to 2017. And just to get everyone familiar with Rujeko, right? She was born in Zimbabwe. She grew up in Washington, D.C. from the age of 2. And when it was time for her to attend college, she headed to New York, where she earned a BA in art history from Columbia. I live in West Harlem. She is a Now, did you get your PhD yet?
No, I'm ABD.
Okay. So she studied art history, theory, and criticism, also at the University of California, San Diego. And she said it was a course at Columbia introducing her to art history that helped crystallize her career path. Now, we have met before at an event. I'm not quite sure which event it was. It was a talk, and we only had a few minutes, but I remembered you. And I remember that you used to be at the Brooklyn Museum. So this year you made that big move from the Brooklyn Museum to the Whitney Museum. And I have to say, is his title president or executive director? The gentleman with the black curly hair.
At the Whitney?
Yes.
Adam Weinberg,
yes.
Our director.
Director.
Yes.
Because sometimes people use president, sometimes people use director, and it's gotten to the point now. I've been to several press events. So he says, oh, that's right, you're from WBAI. He said, you know what? Now you guys are really needed with all of the controversy that's going on. And then when I saw that you guys were doing this exhibition, I thought that really must have stuck with him, this whole thing about we need to start looking at social resistance and protests. And so I said, I got to quickly get to them and have them on this show because it's from your collection. And you guys have very impressive collections in your brand new building. So tell us a little bit about this exhibition.
Well, thank you for having me and for that lovely introduction. So An Incomplete History of Protest is a collection exhibition, as you said, from the early 1940s to the present. And it's really a show that is thinking about how artists in this kind of 60 to 70 year time period have approached the question of politics, of activism, of kind of the social sphere.
Okay.
And so along with my co-curators, Jenny Goldstein and David Breslin, who also work at the Whitney, we have put together an exhibition that is kind of both thematic and chronological, but unfolds kind of along both avenues, and is divided into kind of 8 sections, which again are both kind of thematic and chronological. And the issues that are covered range from kind of the early 1940s, Japanese internment, to the 1960s, the civil rights movement, the Black Panthers, as well as the beatniks and kind of dropout culture. We've also included a section of the exhibition that looks at actually the Whitney's own experience and history as a site of protest itself, because we felt like it was very important to be as transparent as we could and to really be self-reflexive about our own position. We are not objective. Nobody is objective. We all have a position. We all have a kind of stance that we're moving from and that we're looking from.
Okay.
And so we looked focusedly 1960 to 1971, kind of a couple of different incidents in those years in which the Whitney was the site of protest. And then moving into kind of some abstract works by artists who were engaged politically, but whose work was perhaps not overtly political. So thinking also, again, always about artists and really moving from being led by them and by what they did and still do.
All right. So that's interesting. Now you got me curious about the Whitney's position. What were their positions in the 1960s and 70s?
Well, it's not so much positions. It's just that as in the broader culture in the 1960s, you start to see a kind of wholesale societal questioning of the status quo. So if we think about kind of the civil rights movement as an outcropping of a historical moment, which has many antecedents, of course, particularly in the context of kind of the fight against racism in the United States. But there are many, it's a moment in which kind of there's a real sea change in the culture. Like everything is up for questions. Everything is nothing that we accepted previously as a given, whether that be our institutions, our culture, who's in charge of our culture, the way in which we structure our lives, live our lives, all of these, who we live our lives with, all of this is kind of up for question. And so in that same way, one of the earliest protests we included was artists who worked figuratively, sending a letter to the Whitney in 1960 in response to the list of artists coming out for what was then the annual, which is now the biennial, saying that the list was privileging abstraction. And so saying that, and artists like Edward Hopper, who is, of course, very close to the heart of the Whitney, and Jacob Lawrence, another kind of incredible artist whose work is also on view, both of them are on view at the Whitney right now in another show. They were among the signatories of this letter to the Whitney. So there's protests of that kind, which we wouldn't necessarily think of as being in the same vein, all the way to protests for greater representation of artists of color in the collection and the exhibition program, in the curatorial staff, more women in the collection, divestment, or I wouldn't have called it divestment, but, protests against the Vietnam War, an art strike to close the museum for a day in protest against the war in Vietnam, which actually did happen.
Right.
And so a real range of both kind of topical social issues as well as kind of aesthetic issues.
Right. But it also brings about a lot of debate, like just what you were saying with Edward Hopper and Jacob Lawrence. For many communities who have been marginalized, for example, excuse me, I'm tired. And the first thing they do is they function out of, figurative works to give people that sense of hope, to see themselves, because oftentimes they're not seen, that whole sense of being invisible. So I can understand why they were saying, because abstraction was big at that time, and they're saying, what are you saying? Are you still excluding us? Include us. I'm just saying the question, include us. I'm not saying the Whitney did, but it was just like, okay, let's have this dialogue and let's look at it from a broader perspective. So I think that was good.
Yeah.
About, again, doing it in a quiet sort of way. And I'm not advocating an avoidance of noise, But I'm just saying sometimes there are many different ways in which to protest.
Yeah, and I think this is the first time that we've shown archival material in the new building. So, as you mentioned, we moved downtown 2-ish years ago. And so you see in the show a lot of different strategies, from kind of the direct action of this sort of thing, writing a letter, kind of protesting literally at the museum outside, on Madison Avenue, to kind of the artistic protest. So when we move forward into the 20th, I guess almost into the 21st century, when we look at the kind of feminist movement, when we look at the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, when we look at kind of the rise of multiculturalism in the 1990s, and then into the present moment, where we are kind of in some ways looking both forward and backwards, trying to kind of find, what is going to be the way in which we ground ourselves moving forward. And so these are all different moments that the show touches down on and thinks about what artists in those historical moments were really trying to do.
I was mentioning earlier with Stacy, how, a lot of people don't seem to know history. And it's important for people to know history. They think they know history, maybe little tidbits.
Yeah.
But in essence, we need to look at history from a broader stance.
Yeah.
Because you're going to see that humans have always been messy.
Yeah.
That things never happen in a very simple sort of way. It's always been complex. And so therefore, by looking at larger time periods, you start to understand what people went through, but what people did to overcome.
Yeah.
And that's what I think the importance of your exhibition is to give people some sort of reference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A reference for kind of tactics and for strategic kind of approaches, but also kind of a reference for, I think, alluding to what you were saying, a reference for some sort of kind of hope and affirmation that both this has happened before and it has been maybe not fully overcome, but it has been addressed and it has been seen and it has been kind of moved past productively, and that there are cycles. I think one of the things that we saw so clearly in the exhibition, which is, again, to your point about history, is the kind of cyclical nature of so many of the things that artists are protesting in terms of the Whitney, but also just in terms of the world, in terms of issues of the day. So many of the issues of our day have been seen not once, not twice,
but many times before.
Yes, and not just here, but all over the world.
Yeah.
And so I think we were we really wanted there to be a sense of history and a sense of, rather than feeling like that is something that feels oppressive or feels kind of debilitating, that actually that there is some kind of hope to take from that.
Thank you for saying that.
That there's something that we can take from both the repetition of these issues, but also if the issues repeat, the kind of responses and the kind of resistance repeats also. And that kind of cycle, that there's something hopeful about that, as you said, humans are messy, but we also kind of are resilient, and we make a mess, but sometimes we clean up a mess.
Yeah. And I like the fact that you're saying hopeful, because, I talk to a lot of people about, Harlem, and I tell a story where they can understand that it's not just about Harlem. It's about New York City. It's about the country. It's about the hemisphere. And I said, you cannot talk about North, Central, or South America without talking about the transatlantic slave trade. But I tell people, we're not here to talk about the horrors of the slave trade. We already know that. Let's talk about other human dynamics. And therefore we can connect the dots and see patterns that were going on. And people look and they'd be like, wow, that's refreshing. Yeah. Because now you're saying, let's look at other dynamics that may have played into it. And therefore you can come closer to people and you can be more sympathetic and you can be more, forgiving of things that took place. It's not to forget. I don't believe in forgetting. But at the same time, we have to find ways to press forward. And that's what I think your exhibition is trying to do, help people to press forward.
Hopefully. I mean, that's our goal in many ways. I think one of the main ideas that we had in putting it together that's kind of risen to the top and actually is one of the themes in one of the galleries is this idea of the usable past. And so in that gallery, we have works by artists like Julie Moretu, by Annette Lemieux, John Quick-to-See Smith, Mark Bradford, several different artists who really are looking to the past, whether that be kind of events or whether that be kind of imagery or whether that be kind of ideology or ideas, but really as a way to kind of recycle and bring forth to the future and to the present for either, and it can be both positive and I won't say negative, but there's a question, because is the past a place, if we've been doing it and doing it and doing it and we haven't changed,
what does that mean?
So exactly. So I think there is some of that double-edged questioning, which I think is so important, because the wholesale adoption of the past is obviously not a great idea, and neither is a wholesale kind of rejection of the past. So this idea that you kind of go on a case-by-case basis, both as an individual, as a person in the world, but also artists thinking about their work.
Okay. Well, this was great. I'm glad we finally got, this chance to sit down and talk. And this was really, in this 12-minute segment, there was a lot that was said. And I really appreciate it. And please tell our listeners how they can get to the Whitney and when is the exhibition going to continue? How long is it going to continue?
The Whitney is at 99 Gansevoort Street, which is right off of the West Side Highway, right by the High Line. All the subways to 14th Street on the west side will get you there. And the show just opened a week or two ago on August 18th, and it will be up for about 6 to 9 months. We actually haven't figured out the closing date yet, so you have some time to come see it.
Okay,
and
good.
There's great stuff in the whole building. So
yes, and then you can always
trip.
come back and visit again and bring some friends. All right, well, thank you so much, Rujeko.
Yes.
And tell your mom I said hi, too.
I will. Thank you so much.
Okay, have a great day, and we're going to take a break. And we are back with State of the Arts NYC, where we cover art. And didn't we have a wonderful, wonderful conversation with Rujeko Hockley with the Whitney Museum. And I want to thank Veronica Brown over there at the Whitney for helping to make all of this happen. Now we are getting ready to talk to two wonderful filmmakers, and they are Karen Bernstein and Louis Black, and they are the directors and the producers for the American Masters documentary Richard Linklater, Dream is Destiny, and that is going to premiere on PBS on September 1st. So I want to thank both Louis and Karen. Are you both there now?
Yes, I am, Louis Black.
Okay, great. I am so glad the two of you are here to talk with us. Now, Karen, just briefly, she is a Grammy and Emmy award-winning producer for over 35 years. And she, began her career as a director in midlife. And she's done a number of documentary greats on Harry Hampton and Ellen Spiro and Phil Donahue. I remember watching him all the time. And Helen Whitney. And Louis is a legendary cultural force in the Austin film world. In fact, your subject matter, Richard, he started a film series. I don't want to say series because I don't think that's broad enough, but he did start a whole movie scene in Austin. And you're also the co-founder of South by Southwest. And you named it after a film I like by Alfred Hitchcock. I'm a big Alfred Hitchcock fan. North by Northwest. I love that. And you help originate the festival's film components. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. So now tell us, how did the two of you decide to do this documentary on Richard Linklater?
Karen?
I'm sure for Louis it was like the worst decision he's ever made, but no, it was just a documentary waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to Austin in 2000, and I had worked for American Masters for years. Prior to that, in the 90s, I'd worked there for about 7 to 8 years. And so my natural instinct as a producer when I arrived in any kind of new place was to look around and think, I wonder who to make a documentary about, because the goal in a series like American Masters, and really what makes that series so wonderful and so ever present on public television and throughout the airwaves in general, is that it always looks to a biography of a cultural figure as a way of telling a larger story.
Okay.
Perhaps the story about the decade or the century that figure inhabited. And that's really, I think accounts for the staying power of the series itself. So, as a producer, I was looking for, if I had to tell the story of somebody here in Austin who really, embodied the kind of theme and the tenor of the times in which he or she grew up, and also the feeling and the character of the area. And then, of course, there are other prerequisites, like that person had to have made a significant mark in history in general. And, Rick Linklater was really the perfect person to be that story. And then shortly after I met Rick, I met Louis, or maybe even on top of each other. Yeah, Louis and his then wife, Annie, were two of the first people that I met. And they were so embracing. Everybody was so embracing, and that film community was even smaller than it is now when I moved there. And it was a wonderful place, and I could see that. And I could see that Louis and the people at the Chronicle and the people who had started South by Southwest were an enormous force behind what every filmmaker and every artist in that community had been able to produce. And so I thought, well, Louis has to be a part of this. Either he has to be in it or he has to direct it. And I thought, gee, wouldn't it be interesting to have Louis direct this piece? And then the rest is history, I suppose.
Okay. So that was quite a journey, to say the least. I mean, but I like what you said. Basically, you kind of immersed yourself into the city first, and then you kind of decided what you thought was important. I do the same thing when I curate art. I do the same thing. I walk neighborhoods, and I listen to the people and their stories, and then I let that neighborhood kind of talk to me. So I try to match the right artists at the right time, at the right place, for the right reason. And so it kind of works out when you're able to do that. So Louis, tell us, because you're like this big cultural figure in Austin. Tell us, how did you feel about participating in all of this?
I have to start by saying that I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey, and the last time I was on WBAI was 50 years ago.
Oh, my God.
One of my best friends was Phoebe Snow. And she and I were on the Bob Fosse show on WBAI probably about 49 years ago.
My goodness!
So this is a homecoming.
Oh, that's fantastic!
But I've been in Austin for, a long time. I met Rick. I started the weekly paper here called the Austin Chronicle, and I met Rick when he came up to me at a rock club to talk about an obituary I'd written on Sam Peckinpah. And he and I began talking about films. And that conversation has now been going on for, over 30 years. And so when Karen came and said, let's do this doc, I didn't kind of realize it at first, but what it became was this conversation that Rick and I had on so many different directors over the decades. Suddenly we were talking about Rick, but in the same way. Rick doesn't always like talking about his films, but this was a conversation we had ongoing on Sam Fuller and John Ford and Alfred Hitchcock and Francois Truffaut and Fassbinder and Godard, and now we're talking about Rick. And so it really was very organic.
Okay. Oh, God, that is fabulous. You said a lot in a couple of minutes. Yes, all those great filmmakers. And I love many of them. I love film. I love the storytelling component of film, and if they can immerse you where you lose, sense of where you are and you're just focused on that moment. So that's fantastic. And so with Rick, he's a sort of independent kind of guy, self-taught, that kind of watched films, correct? So when you were doing this, did you, follow behind him or just let him tell you his story?
Well, it started with Karen, so you should talk about, filming him on the set and stuff. Karen, talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, I have been trying to pitch a piece on Richard Linklater for years, to American Masters, and as independent and as, vital a force as he was in my community, let's put it that way, in my community of filmmakers, he was really seismic. I mean, he's made such huge advances in how the art was formed. I hate to say it, but to a lot of bigger television producers and series makers, he wasn't that well known. Like, they couldn't really put their finger on it. Mm-hmm. And then Boyhood came on the scene, right? Okay. And then everybody was like, oh my God, it's a revelation. He's up for all these Academy Awards, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time that Boyhood came out, Rick is constantly making films, regardless of what the rest of the world thinks about him, right? He was doing his film called it ended up being called Everybody Wants Some. And it was, again, a very Richard Linklater kind of homegrown, low budget, classic, and a continuation of Dazed and Confused, which had been a extremely popular film. And it was perfect for us. As a producer, I thought this is absolutely what we need, because there really weren't any stars in it. There was nobody that would have a snooty agent or somebody controlling the strings behind the scene. The set was really in Austin or just outside of Austin. The entire thing was being filmed there. The producers were all people that I knew. Mm-hmm. And I turned to Lewis and I said, okay, now's the time. If we're going to make a documentary on Rick, everybody knows him because of Boyhood. American Masters had just had a kind of regime change, and Michael Cantor took over the head of operations, and he is my age, so he totally knew who Rick Linklater was. Okay. And I said, let's do it. Let's just get on that set, whatever we have to do. And we sort of got Rick's permission, although Lewis tells a very funny story about that, so I'll let him take it from there.
Go ahead, Rick.
So we were at, when we were at Sundance, somebody in the audience said, so, Rick, when did you actually give them permission to go ahead and make this film? Rick thought for a second and said, well, I still have it. It was like, because we never asked the big question. Okay. Karen would say, can I shoot on the set? I would say, can I interview you? Which I never said, can we make this documentary about you? Because we weren't sure he'd say yes to that. Oh. We knew he would say yes as shooting on the set. We knew he would say yes as interviewing him. It was clear that when he let us interview him, that he knew who we were doing.
Okay.
It was incremental. All right. That says a lot. He's a real artist. Right. Okay. He's a real artist, but he's also he's very humble. He really does not like to talk about himself, and it's almost painful to watch him talk about himself. Mm-hmm. But with Lewis, again, because they had been having these conversations for so long, I think he really kind of forgot that the camera was there. He just loosened up because it was just a conversation with an old friend.
Okay, that's how it should be.
When you were talking about loving movies and how much movies meant to you, the most extraordinary part of this experience, my long relationship with Rick and being in Austin, is it's about movies. Rick doesn't live in L.A. or New York for a reason. He's not interested in being famous or going to parties or things. He wants to make movies. And we're together, we talk about movies. He started the Austin Film Society, and I helped with that, but he started mostly to see the movies he wanted to see, so, on the big screen, so he could do a Fassbinder retrospect or he could do a Western retrospect. But in Austin, and I hope this film captures this, it's really about loving movies. It's not about stars. It's not about the industry. It's not about power. It's really about how wonderful movies are and what an extraordinary person this director, this film creator is.
Yeah, it's about the work. That's when you're dealing with a real artist. When they're saying, I don't want to hear about all of that stuff. I just want to focus on the work. And when they focus just on the work and wanting to do it well and wanting people to connect, then you're dealing with a real artist. This is fantastic. And so I just want to remind people, because our segment is almost up, that this is going to premiere nationwide Friday, September 1st at 9 p.m. on PBS. People can check, their listing if they're not in New York for PBS so that they can see this fabulous documentary, and I'm sure it's going to be available online afterwards, but I think it would be great to catch it on the premiere night. so that you can see it and kind of immerse yourself in the world of Richard Linklater. So I want to thank the two of you for joining us to talk briefly about this and to give a shout out to Natasha, who helped me to make all of this happen, because I didn't know him well. But then when I saw Before Sunrise, I said, I know this film. I liked it. With Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. Yes. I was like, I'm on board. I know this film. I like this film. But I just want to thank the two of you so very, very much for joining us. And I hope to meet the two of you individually soon.
Okay, it would be great.
Thank you.
I would love to come back to WBAI at some point and visit.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Hi, and we are back with State of the Arts NYC, where we cover art, and we just had a wonderful conversation with Louis Black and Karen Bernstein, who are the filmmakers for the new American Masters documentary, Richard Linklater, Dream is Destiny. And as a reminder, it will premiere nationwide on September 1st at 9 p.m. on PBS. And now I was very fortunate enough to get Yvette Griffith. Yvette, are you there?
I am.
Great. And thank you for accommodating us. She's talking to us from London to deal with Jazz Refreshed. It's a showcase, and to talk about the British Jazz Burst Alive in New York City and the UK Jazz revolution that's going on. I got so excited, I stumbled on my words. But tell us about this revolution, because tonight I'm going to a party that's going to kick off Afropunk. And so please tell us about what's going on with the group that you're working with.
Right. Okay. Well, hi there. Hello. I'll start by saying hello.
Hello.
It's good to be invited on. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So Jazz Refreshed, I should probably just quickly explain who we are. Jazz Refreshed is a UK-based jazz promotion company. Now, the first thing we say is forget what you think you know about jazz. Okay. Because it covers such a wide spectrum and it influences so many different genres. And we've been in existence since 2003, providing opportunities and performance platforms for emerging and mid-career and established artists. At our weekly live music residency in London's Notting Hill, which most people know Notting Hill. Okay. So we've been doing that for the last 14, almost 15 years. And we've got to a point where there is so much excitement happening in the UK. We've got a lot of young musicians, really talented musicians coming to the fore, making waves, getting noticed, winning ridiculous awards. Great. That we felt it was time to start actually creating more international pathways for the world to have experience what's going on in the UK. We were very, very, as Jazz Refresh, we were very, very, very fortunate to receive a substantial amount of funding from the Arts Council of England. It's like one of the main arts public subsidy funding organisations. And they were really keen to support our aspirations of exporting world-class UK jazz talent around the world. So this project started earlier this year, and we launched at South by Southwest. We had the first ever UK jazz showcase at South by Southwest in all the years. And NPR actually recorded it and aired it on their Jazz Night in America show. We are now back. We've done Afropunk Paris. We've done Afropunk London. Afropunk were very kind to invite us to come over to New York and bring some musicians. And while we're there, it just makes sense for us to actually put our stamp on another event. So we're rolling out 2 events. One tomorrow. At Baby's All Right as part of Afropunk Festival After Dark. Okay. And the second is on Monday at New Blue in East Village. Okay. And that's on Monday. Monday the 28th.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So we've got 3 really exciting acts that we're bringing along, Moses Boyd Exodus, led by Moses Boyd, drummer, composer extraordinaire. I mean, we would still be here tomorrow if I was to list all the awards this very young 25-year-old has already racked up in the UK.
Wow.
But Jazz FM Awards, MOBO Awards. I don't know if you've heard of MOBO in the States, but it's one of the main black music awards, music of black origin. The UK Parliamentary Awards. I mean, he's won a number of awards in his very, very short professional musical career.
Okay.
So that band is led by Moses Boyd. He has a number of incantations. There's also Binker and Moses and Solo Exodus. He's a very, very talented individual that doesn't let the boundaries restrict him. And then we've got Shabaka Hutchins, who is out there in a big way doing his thing. And he's actually performing at the Afropunk Festival main stage area during the day with one of his 3 bands, Shabaka and the Ancestors. But he will be performing at our After Dark on Saturday and also on Monday at New Blue with Moses Boyd and Theon Cross. Theon is actually one of his band members for a band called Sons of Kemet, which is a wild, wacky, wonderful, live, high-energy jazz meets calypso meets reggae.
Wow.
I mean, it's an amazing, really high-energy set. So you can really, really expect some amazing things there. And then we've got Native Dancer, who are they blend jazz with soul, with electronica. It's a really, really interesting mix. And Frida Torre, who is the vocalist, has the smoothest, loveliest, sexiest tones.
Wow. I'm
but
so
yeah,
excited.
I mean, either show is a show not to miss. And I would say come to Baby's All Right. You know, come to the Afropunk After Dark, have a great time, and come and see them all over again in 2 days' time.
Okay. I know you guys, I mean, Afropunk, it has turned into such a mega event in New York City. People who never thought about going before. A friend of mine from high school said, "Oh man, I didn't realize how great that was." People are going and they're like, this is awesome. Yeah, Afropunk has become huge in New York City.
Massive.
Yes, it is. It
And
really
you know they're expanding the brand around the world. Afropunk London launched last year. We just had it about a month ago in London for this year. And obviously there's Afropunk Paris. I think they're launching in South Africa this year in Johannesburg, which will be quite amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. It's an amazing brand. And, you know, we felt really aligned with Afropunk as a brand because we are about breaking down perceptions, you know, and making every music feel like it's for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, there was a real elitism in the UK with jazz for many, many years, and there still is in a lot of ways.
Okay.
One of the things that we wanted to do was to break down some of those barriers. So by bringing in much more diverse multicultural audiences, as well as actually performing in non-jazz venues. So people don't feel like, well, it's jazz, it's not for me.
Right.
You know?
No.
Yeah,
I think that's phenomenal because we have that bit of the problem here, too, in the U.S. where people feel that jazz is, you know, for older people and it's not for young people. But I think that is all changing now because when people understand the roots of it all, that's the part. Then you start to see, oh, what you're listening today, it came from here. And if you start putting this all together,
this is our music.
You'll see this thread.
Music.
You will see this thread. Well, I am so glad you were able to accommodate us. I want to say hi to Matt, who helped make all of this happen with Fully Altered, because
thank you, Matt.
He really did a great job in quickly accommodating us because I said we got to get them on the show. We got to get them on the show. But thank you so very, very much. I know, what time is it in the UK? What, midnight?
It's hit at 11 p.m. It's
11
p.m. And I've actually just got home. I went to a phenomenal exhibition at the Tate Modern
in
London called Soul of a Nation. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's actually the artwork of the Black Power movement.
Yes, and there's a big Black Power,
phenomenal.
Big Black Power movement exhibition, new one at the Schomburg Center. So yes, everyone's acknowledging the 50th anniversary. But thank you so much, Yvette. Folks, please check out Afropunk's website, and hope you can catch some of these wonderful British UK jazz artist. So thank you so
The
very,
tickets
very
are
much.
next to nothing. Please
Okay.
come along. Come and check out what the UK is doing on the jazz scene
All
and
right.
meet some of our guys. Some of
Okay.
our guys. Jazz Refreshed are in the country. British Underground, who are supporting us logistically, are in the country. And obviously our musicians are. And a
Thank-
big shout out to Arts Council England for helping us make this happen.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
You too, Savona. Take care.
Bye-bye. And I just want to say thank you to all of our guests for joining us today. We've been kicking off a late summer and early fall series. So everyone, check out Afropunk, check out the American Folk Art Museum in the Whitney, and American Masters. We will see you next week, where we're going to be talking with Nari Ward and Socrates, because he is like hitting everywhere. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Does protect the environment, save Mother Earth, and stop polluters mean the same thing? Do they imply the same thing? On the next episode of Kangel's Ecologic, I'll have a number of environmentalists discussing the language we use. What's effective? What's divisive? What do we imply by what we say? Jeannie Shaw, J.K. Canepa, Tim Keating, and others will be joining me on Tuesday, August 29th, 8 p.m., right here on WBAI New York and WBAI.org.
My words are weapons. Shoot across my opponent. My words are weapons. I never show no emotion. My words are weapons.
Imhotep Gary Bird inviting you to join us for Radio GBE, the Global Black Experience and the Global Beat Experience, where the message is in the music. Friday nights, 6 to 8 p.m. Join us for all the features, interviews, guest coverage, and the music mix you've come to expect. And, of course, the things that light up your Friday night here in New York City and across the country and right through the diaspora. Pass the word. Bird is flying high in the New York sky with Radio GBE, Radio in the Key of Life. Friday nights, 6 to 8 p.m., right here on WBAI 99.5 FM and WBAI.org.
In commemoration of West Indian American Day Carnival Association's 50th annual parade of the bands on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, WBAI is proud to stream this carnival live and direct on 99.5 FM and WBAI.org. Events kick off from the grounds of the Brooklyn Museum beginning Thursday, August 31st through Labor Day, Monday, September 4th. WBAI will cover the Stay in School concert on Friday, September 1st at 11 a.m., the Kiddies Carnival on Saturday, September 2nd at 9 a.m., and Charlie Blocko's on Fulton Street and Nostrand Avenue from 3 p.m. For more information, please visit WBAI.org or visit WIADCAcarnival.org.
Hi, I'm Felipe Luciano. On Friday, September 1st, from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., Margaret Gilpin and Sally O'Brien will be presenting a special interview with Cuba's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Ana Yancy Rodriguez Camejo, along with Deputy Ambassador Ana Silvia Rodriguez Abascal, will take a look at current U.S.-Cuba relations, some regional issues, upcoming Cuban elections, and more. I'm Felipe Luciano, urging all of you to please tune into this progressive, important Cuba in Focus production. That's Friday, September 1st, 7 a.m., a talk with Cuba's top representatives to the United Nations. Don't miss it.
Hola, mis amigos. My name is Chico Alvarez, and I'm the host of New World Gallery, which airs every Saturday at 3 p.m. on this station, WBAI. WBAI is listener-supported, commercial-free resistance radio. We challenge the norms and defy them. Let's break down what that really means. It means that no clandestine corporate entity can tell me how to do my show. It means that you, the listener, and the diverse WBAI community have a voice. It is a voice which reverberates across the tri-state area. But in order to keep providing you with the independent news, unique conversation, and groundbreaking arts content you rely on, we need your help. Donate by visiting give2wbai.org or pledge right now from your smartphone by texting the letters WBAI to the numbers 41444. And thank you for your support.
The success of WBAI's recent fund drive is thanks to you, and we just want to say thank you. I'm Catherine Davis. Here at the station, we take the notion of community radio really seriously. When we say we're here because of you, that's not just something we say to make you feel good. It's our operating principle. Your generous